I learned my fiancé had secretly married another woman in Mexico. You think you know betrayal? Try finding out the man you're about to marry isn't just cheating. He has an entirely separate life, a wife, a home, and a baby on the way, all while telling her you are his delusional, unstable sister. But trust me, what happened when his two worlds finally collided? That was a moment for the history books. I'd been with Bennett for 4 years, engaged for almost 2, and I genuinely thought we had a pretty damn good relationship. We met at a friend's wedding, hit it off instantly, and I believed he was the one. He worked as a project manager at a big firm in San Diego, where his mom was actually in HR. We lived together in his condo, and life, as far as I knew, was good. Bennett traveled to Mexico for work about once a month, for 5 to 7 days at a time. He always said the same thing. Major projects near Mexico City needed his oversight. His company did have international clients, so it sounded plausible enough. He'd always come back with little gifts for me. Tequila, handmade jewelry, cute sugar skull decorations that I collected. I thought it was sweet that he always remembered me, even during his stressful work trips. But looking back, there were other things I should have questioned. Bennett was weird about social media. He didn't have Facebook or Instagram, claiming he valued his privacy. And whenever I posted photos of us, he'd ask me not to tag his name or write too many details. He said it was because his company worked with government contracts and they were super strict about employees' online presence. Again, it sounded plausible, so I didn't question it. Not then. The truth started unraveling after we got engaged. Last spring, Bennett's mom hosted this big engagement party for us. She invited all these people from their company, friends I'd never met, and some of Bennett's cousins. I remember during the party, I overheard 2 of his coworkers talking about his trips to Mexico. They both looked at me, caught, and immediately changed the subject. A little ripple of unease, but I shook it off. Later that night, Bennett's cousin Brady got super drunk. He cornered me and started saying really strange things like, "So, you're the American girlfriend?" And then, Bennett always did like to keep his options open. My stomach dropped. When I asked what the hell he meant, Brady just laughed it off. Nothing. Just family jokes. Felt anything but funny. I told Bennett about it later, and he got incredibly defensive, saying Brady was an alcoholic who always tried to stir up drama. But the seeds of doubt were planted. After that party, I started paying more attention. I noticed Bennett always took the same small leather duffel bag on his Mexico trips, and he was weirdly protective of it. He'd unpack it himself, immediately throwing everything into the wash. I realized I'd never actually seen what was in that bag. One time I jokingly asked if he was smuggling drugs, and he got genuinely angry, accusing me of not trusting him. The anger felt disproportionate. When Bennett left for his next work trip, I did something I'm not proud of. But thank God I did it. I searched our condo. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, but something felt off. In his home office desk, buried under warranties and old bills, I found a second phone charger. Not for his iPhone, but for a Samsung. Bennett didn't have a Samsung. My heart started to pound. Then I found some bills from a Mexican bank, and a photo strip from one of those booths, crumpled up in the very back of the drawer. The photo strip showed Bennett with his arm around a beautiful Latina woman. They were making silly faces, kissing, looking every bit the happy couple. My breath hitched. I kept searching, desperate now, and found an envelope with a receipt for a wedding ring. Not my ring. The receipt was in Spanish from a jewelry store in Mexico City, dated about 2 years after we started dating. A year before he proposed to me. I took photos of everything with my phone, then meticulously put it all back exactly how I'd found it. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the camera. I debated confronting him the moment he returned, but something told me to wait. If he had been living a double life for years, I needed to understand the full extent before blowing everything up. When Bennett got back, I played completely normal. I smiled, I nodded, I let him kiss me, telling me about his exhausting meetings, even as he brought me a beautiful hand-painted ceramic bowl. Internally, I was screaming. The next morning, he left his iPad on the kitchen counter while he showered. He'd never given me his passcode, but I'd seen him enter it enough times to have figured it out. I opened it. That's when I discovered everything. Bennett had a whole separate account, one I'd never seen before. The name on it was Bennett Alvarez. He'd added a second last name I didn't even know he had. There were messages between him and someone named Gabriella. Hundreds of them. Love letters, photos, plans. And then the truly shocking twist hit me. Gabriella wasn't his girlfriend or his mistress. She was his wife. His actual legal wife. They'd been married in Mexico City 3 years ago, while he was already engaged to me. But it got worse. So much worse. In the messages to her, he explained my existence by telling her I was his mentally ill sister, who couldn't live independently, so he had to care for me part-time in the US. He told her I was unstable, delusional, and sometimes confused about our relationship. That's why he couldn't bring her to the States yet. Because I might have an episode. The text showed he'd been planning to move her to the US. Once they got her visa approved, they had a whole timeline mapped out. Meanwhile, he kept pushing back our wedding date, claiming he wanted to save more money or wait for a promotion. But the thing that truly broke me? Gabriella was 7 months pregnant with his child. There were ultrasound photos in the text. They'd been trying for over a year, and she was due in 2 months. He'd been building a nursery in their Mexico City apartment while simultaneously planning a wedding with me. Suddenly, the iPad dinged with a new WhatsApp notification. I clicked on it without thinking. It opened to his conversation with Gabriella. She just sent a video of her pregnant belly moving as the baby kicked. Her message read, "Your daughter is dancing this morning. We miss you so much, mi amor. Only 8 weeks until you meet her. I love you." My blood ran cold. I quickly took screenshots of everything. The text, the WhatsApp messages, the photos, the ultrasounds, their scanned marriage certificate. I emailed everything to myself, backed it up to my cloud storage, and then carefully, painstakingly, put the iPad back exactly where he'd left it. I needed time to process. I needed to plan my next move. This wasn't just cheating. This was a calculated, years-long double life with a pregnant wife and plans that didn't include me. Except as a twisted cover story. And he'd painted me as mentally ill. Mentally ill. I called in sick to work for the next 2 days while Bennett was at his office, claiming I had a stomach bug. Really, I was researching everything I could about Bennett's life in Mexico, Mexican marriage laws, and what the hell I was going to do next. That's when I found Gabriella's Instagram account. It wasn't private. There were hundreds of photos of her and Bennett together. At family parties, on vacation, at their wedding. In her bio, it proudly stated, "Baby girl coming June 2024. I spent hours scrolling through her feed, watching my relationship implode in real time. Photos of them building the nursery together during his last work trip. Pictures of their wedding that happened when Bennett told me he was at a conference in Denver. Family gatherings where he was introduced as her husband while I sat at home thinking he was working late." The most recent post was from just 2 days ago. It showed Bennett kissing her pregnant belly with the caption, "2 more months until we become 3. So blessed to have found such an amazing husband and father for our little girl." I was physically sick, but more than that, I was furious. Not just sad or heartbroken. Enraged. This man had stolen years of my life while building a complete, separate life with someone else. And he'd told her I was his delusional sister. That. I needed to make a decision. Do I confront Bennett immediately? Do I contact Gabriella? Do I just disappear and let him wonder what happened? Each option seemed incomplete. I wanted them both to know what kind of man he really was. After careful consideration, I decided my revenge needed to be calculated and complete. No quick confrontation that he could lie his way out of. No easy escape for him. First step. I needed to contact Gabriella. But I couldn't just send her a message saying, "Hey, your husband's been engaged to me for 2 years." She was 7 months pregnant. I needed to be careful about how I approached this. Plus, what if she didn't believe me? What if she thought I was exactly what Bennett had described? A delusional woman making up stories. I needed irrefutable proof and a plan that would expose Bennett completely to Gabriella, to his family, to his workplace, to everyone. And I needed to make sure I protected myself in the process. I spent that night meticulously crafting my strategy. I had evidence. I had rage. And I had nothing left to lose. Bennett had no idea what was coming for him. The next morning, I spent hours practicing exactly what I would say to Gabriella. This wasn't just about me anymore. This poor woman was building a family with a man who had constructed an elaborate web of lies. But before contacting her, I needed more ammunition against Bennett. While he was at work, I went through our apartment taking photos of our life together. Our engagement photos, the wedding venue contracts with both our names, receipts for the deposits we'd paid, the ring on my finger. I found our vacation photos, family holiday pictures, everything that proved we weren't siblings, but a couple planning a future. I also did something that still makes me feel like a complete badass. I went to our bank and withdrew my half of our joint savings, about $14,000. We'd been saving for our wedding and honeymoon, and I wasn't about to let him use my money to build his life with someone else. I opened a new account at a different bank. The teller asked if everything was okay when I closed my portion of the joint account, and I just said I was surprising Bennett with a financial consolidation plan. She bought it completely. I made copies of our lease agreement, showing we lived together as a couple, not as siblings. I even found old birthday cards he'd given me, with messages like, "To my beautiful fiancé," and "Can't wait to call you my wife." I gathered everything that proved our relationship and his lies. Then came the hard part: contacting Gabriella. I couldn't just DM her on Instagram. If Bennett saw the message first, he'd delete it and block me. I needed to email her directly. After some searching through Bennett's texts, I found her personal email address, the one she used for things other than communicating with him. I created a new email account specifically for this purpose and drafted a message. I didn't want to come across as the angry other woman, or sound delusional, which is exactly what he told her I was. I wrote something simple. "Gabriella, I have important information about Bennett that you need to see. This will be difficult, but you deserve the truth." I attached just 3 things to start. A recent photo of Bennett and me together at his company Christmas party from 4 months ago, a copy of our lease agreement, and a picture of my engagement ring with the date we got engaged. I gave her my phone number and said I had more proof if she wanted to see it, but understood if she needed time to process this first. After triple-checking everything, I hit send at 11:43 a.m. on a Wednesday. Then I waited. I expected to wait days, maybe even weeks. I figured she might think it was a prank, or that Bennett would intercept the email somehow. But at 2:17 p.m., my phone rang from an international number. I almost dropped the damn thing trying to answer it. It was Gabriella. She was speaking rapidly in Spanish, then switched to English when she realized I couldn't understand her. She asked who I really was, if this was some kind of sick joke. I told her everything. How long Bennett and I had been together, our engagement, our living situation. She kept interrupting, asking specific questions about Bennett. His birthmark on his shoulder, the scar on his knee from a childhood accident, his favorite food, his parents' names. It was surreal, like we were comparing notes on a book we'd both read. Except the book was a man we both thought we knew. With each detail I confirmed, her voice got shakier. I could tell the exact moment she accepted the truth. She went completely silent for about 10 seconds, then started sobbing. Not gentle tears, but the kind of raw, guttural crying that comes when your entire reality collapses. Between sobs, she told me Bennett was supposed to fly down the following week for a doctor's appointment. They were going to see their baby girl on the 3D ultrasound for the first time. She'd been preparing their apartment, getting everything ready for his visit. I asked if she wanted more proof. She did. I sent her everything while we were still on the phone. The engagement photos, wedding venue contracts, holiday pictures with his family, our text messages. As she received each one, her crying turned to something else. Pure rage. She started telling me about their life, how they'd met 5 years ago when Bennett was on a genuine business trip to Mexico City. How he'd pursued her, told her he'd fallen in love at first sight. How he'd arranged his work to include regular trips to Mexico to see her. They'd gotten married 3 years ago in a small ceremony with her family. Her brother had initially been suspicious of this American who could only visit periodically, but Bennett had charmed everyone. Then she told me the story he'd sold her about me. According to Bennett, I was his troubled younger sister who suffered from bipolar disorder and delusions. He claimed I sometimes believed we were in a relationship and he had to humor me to keep me stable. He told her he was working on getting me our care, so he could eventually bring her to the US, but it was complicated because of my condition. I was livid, using mental illness as a cover story, making me sound unstable and delusional. It was beyond cruel to both of us. The conversation lasted nearly 3 hours. Gabriella was fiercely intelligent and practical, despite her emotional state. She asked if I had confronted Bennett yet. When I said no, she suggested something I hadn't considered. "Let's coordinate," she said. "Let's not give him any warning. Let's make sure he can't wiggle out of this or create more lies." She wanted to fly to San Diego with her brother and confront Bennett together face to face. And she knew exactly where to do it. At his workplace where his mother and colleagues would witness everything. Part of me worried about the stress this might cause her pregnancy. But Gabriella assured me her doctor had said she was cleared for travel, and her pregnancy had been healthy and uncomplicated. Plus, her brother Rayon would be with her for support. We made a plan. She would fly up with Rayon in 3 days. She didn't tell Bennett she was coming. Instead, she acted normal in their conversations, telling him she couldn't wait for his visit the following week. Meanwhile, I would continue acting like everything was fine with Bennett at home. Those 3 days were the hardest of my life. Sleeping next to him, making small talk over dinner, kissing him goodbye in the mornings. All while knowing exactly what kind of monster he really was. He had no idea I'd talked to Gabriella or that I knew anything. Once he even got a call from her while we were watching TV. And I watched him step into the other room, lower his voice, and tell her he missed her and couldn't wait to see her and the baby. I had to dig my nails into my palms to keep from screaming. The night before Gabriella was set to arrive, Bennett's mom, Nicole, called me. Just a normal check-in about wedding plans. She asked if we'd set a date yet, talked about venue options, mentioned she'd been looking at mother-of-the-groom dresses. The entire conversation felt like I was in the Twilight Zone. Did she know about Gabriella? Was she part of this deception? I couldn't tell, but I kept the conversation short, saying I wasn't feeling well. After the call, I broke down. The stress of maintaining this charade was eating me alive. I texted my best friend, Amanda, asking if I could stay with her after everything went down. I didn't tell her why, just that I was leaving Bennett and would explain later. That night, while Bennett slept, I quietly packed a small bag with my essential documents, some clothes and irreplaceable personal items, then hid it in my car trunk. The next morning, Gabriella texted that her flight had landed. She and Rayon had checked into their hotel and would meet me at the coffee shop across from Bennett's office at 1 p.m. Bennett had no idea his entire world was about to implode. I called in sick to work again, claiming my stomach bug had gotten worse. Bennett left for work like any normal day, kissing me goodbye and reminding me to stay hydrated. The casual normality of it made me want to vomit. I spent the morning finalizing my preparations. I withdrew the last of my personal money from our other shared account. I made copies of all the evidence and organized it into 3 folders. One for me, one for Gabriella, and one that we'd present to Bennett's mother in HR. I also called our wedding venue and photographer to cancel our arrangements, citing unforeseen circumstances. I'd lose the deposits, but I didn't care. At 12:30, I drove to the coffee shop near Bennett's office. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely park. I sat at a table in the corner, ordering a coffee I couldn't drink, watching the door. They walked in. Gabriella was exactly as she appeared in photos. Beautiful with long dark hair and a very visible pregnancy. Rayon was tall and serious-looking, protective of his sister. The moment Gabriella saw me in person, her eyes filled with tears. We didn't hug or shake hands. What social protocol exists for meeting your fiancé's secret wife? Instead, she sat across from me, placed her hands on her belly and said simply, "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for telling me the truth." We reviewed our plan one last time. Bennett's company occupied 3 floors of an office building downtown. Visitors had to sign in at security, but Bennett's mother, Nicole, worked in HR on the first floor. Our plan was to ask for her directly, show her our evidence, and request that she bring Bennett down to the conference room. We wanted witnesses, but we also didn't want to create a scene that would cause Gabriella unnecessary stress. When we reached the reception desk, I asked for Nicole, saying it was a family emergency regarding Bennett. The receptionist called up and minutes later, Nicole appeared, her face concerned, until she saw me. Then she smiled, confused about why I was there with a very pregnant woman and a stern-looking man. I introduced Gabriella as Bennett's wife. Nicole laughed, thinking it was a joke. I handed her the folder of evidence. She opened it, still smiling, until she saw the marriage certificate. Her face went completely blank as she flipped through the photos, the documentation, the proof of her son's double life. Nicole didn't say a word. She just picked up the reception phone and asked someone to send Bennett to conference room A immediately. Then she led us down a hallway. We sat in silence in the conference room. Nicole looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. She kept staring at Gabriella's pregnant belly, then at me, then back at the documents. Finally, the door opened and Bennett walked in, looking confused. He saw me first, then Nicole, and his expression changed to concern. Then his eyes landed on Gabriella and Rayon, and his entire face just collapsed. There's no other way to describe it. Every drop of blood drained from his face, and for a second I thought he might actually pass out. "What's going on?" he whispered. But it was clear he knew exactly what was happening. His double life had just collided in the most spectacular way possible. That's when Rayon stood up, pointed at Bennett, and said something forceful in Spanish that I couldn't understand. Bennett backed up against the wall, shaking his head, looking desperately from face to face for an ally and finding none. "You told me she was your mentally ill sister," Gabriella said, her voice shaking but clear. "You built a nursery for our daughter while planning a wedding with her." Bennett started stammering about misunderstandings, about complicated situations, about how he could explain everything. But there was no explanation that could possibly justify what he'd done. I stood up slowly, removing my engagement ring. I placed it on the conference table and slid it toward him. "I think your wife might want to know why you've been engaged to your sister for 2 years, I said, my voice ice cold. Nicole hadn't spoken a word until then. She looked at her son and asked one question. "Why?" The single word contained so much pain, so much confusion. Bennett started crying, saying he loved both of us, that he got caught up in something he couldn't control, that he never meant to hurt anyone. Each excuse made me angrier. He was still trying to manipulate the situation to make himself the victim somehow. That's when Gabriella stood up, placed her hands protectively over her belly, and told Bennett exactly what she thought of him in rapid Spanish that needed no translation. Her brother stepped between them when Bennett tried to approach her. Security arrived at that point. Apparently, raised voices in the conference room had attracted attention. Nicole, still in shock, explained there was a family situation that required privacy. But it was too late. People were gathered outside the glass walls. As Bennett continued making excuses, I noticed his company CEO watching from outside the room, his expression darkening as he pieced together what was happening. Just as security was asking us to leave, I made one final move. I turned to Nicole and handed her the third folder. "Copies of everything for HR," I said. "Your son committed marriage fraud, and I thought his employer should know the kind of person they're trusting with company business." We were escorted out of the building, but not before I saw Bennett's colleagues watching, whispering, taking in the spectacle of a man caught between his fiancé and his pregnant wife. In the parking lot, Gabriella grabbed my arm. Her face was tear-streaked but determined. "This wasn't over," she told me. There were legal implications to what Bennett had done to both of us. Her brother, Rayon, who'd been mostly silent, finally spoke in careful English. "He is a lawyer in Mexico City," he explained. "What Bennett has done isn't just morally reprehensible. It is potentially criminal. Bigamy is illegal in both countries." As we stood there processing everything, my phone buzzed with a text from Bennett. "Please let me explain. I never meant to hurt anyone. I love you both. Please." I showed it to Gabriella. She laughed bitterly and showed me her phone. He'd sent her almost the identical message. Even now, he was trying to play both sides. After the confrontation, Gabriella, Rayon, and I went back to the coffee shop across from Bennett's office building. We were all shaking from adrenaline, from rage, from the sheer insanity of what had just happened. The barista kept glancing nervously at our table, probably because Gabriella was crying while angrily stabbing at her phone screen. Rayon was speaking rapid Spanish into his phone, and I was just sitting there with this weird hollow laugh bubbling up every few minutes. We must have looked completely unhinged. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Bennett had already sent 23 text messages in the 30 minutes since we'd left his office. They ranged from desperate, "Please just talk to me," to manipulative, "This isn't fair, you're not letting me explain," to threatening, "You have no idea what you've done to my career." I showed them to Gabriella, who just rolled her eyes and turned her phone around to show me the nearly identical Spanish messages he was sending her. Rayon looked up from his call and told us he'd been speaking with a colleague who specialized in international family law. The situation was complicated because the marriages crossed international boundaries. But one thing was clear. Bennett had committed bigamy, which is illegal in both the US and Mexico. If we wanted to pursue legal action, we could. While we were discussing this, Nicole, Bennett's mother, walked into the coffee shop. I almost didn't recognize her. She looked completely destroyed. She asked if she could join us, and when Gabriella nodded, she sat down heavily in the empty chair. Nicole didn't beat around the bush. She told us Bennett had been escorted from the building and placed on immediate administrative leave pending an investigation. His boss had been furious, not just about the personal scandal, but because Bennett had been falsifying his travel reports. Those trips to Mexico weren't all business. He'd been charging the company for flights and hotels while conducting his double life. That, she said, was grounds for termination. Then Nicole did something I didn't expect. She started apologizing to both of us. Through tears, she admitted she'd had suspicion something wasn't right with Bennett's behavior, but had convinced herself she was being paranoid. Gabriella reached out and took Nicole's hand. That simple gesture broke me. Here was this heavily pregnant woman who just had her entire world shattered, comforting the mother of the man who'd betrayed her. It was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Nicole asked to see a picture of the ultrasound. When Gabriella showed her, Nicole covered her mouth and started crying again. "I'm going to be a grandmother," she kept saying. I didn't even know. Then Nicole turned to me. She said she understood if I never wanted to speak to anyone in their family again, but she hoped someday I might forgive her for not seeing what her son was doing. I told her there was nothing to forgive. Bennett had fooled all of us. His lies weren't her responsibility. The conversation shifted to practical matters. I told them I'd already moved my essential belongings to my friend Amanda's place and would get the rest when Bennett wasn't home. Gabriella explained she needed to fly back to Mexico City tomorrow. Her doctor didn't want her traveling too close to her due date. Rayon said he'd stay an extra day to help me if needed. As we were talking, Bennett called Nicole's phone. She answered, putting it on speaker without telling him. Bennett was frantic, begging his mother to help him fix this, saying his whole life was falling apart. Nicole's response was ice cold. She told him he had created the situation himself, and now he would face the consequences. She said she'd raised him better than this, and she was ashamed. Then she hung up. My phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Bennett with the subject line, "Please read. I can explain everything." I opened it and read it aloud to the group. It was a rambling, self-pitying mess about how he'd never meant for things to go this far, how he truly loved both of us in different ways, how he'd gotten caught up in lies that spiraled out of control. The email ended with him asking for a chance to explain in person, alone, without all the drama and audience. By this point it was early evening. We exchanged contact information and made plans to stay in touch. Nicole hugged both of us before leaving, promising to support Gabriella however she could, regardless of what happened with Bennett. Rayon helped Gabriella to their rental car, and I headed to Amanda's apartment, emotionally exhausted. I told Amanda the basics over text, but when I arrived at her place I broke down completely and told her everything. She was horrified. She kept saying she'd always thought Bennett was too good to be true, but she never imagined this. She helped me unpack my emergency bag and set up her guest room, then ordered takeout since neither of us had the energy to cook. While we were eating, I got a call from Bennett's cousin Brady, the drunk one from the engagement party who'd made those weird comments. He said he'd heard what happened from another family member and wanted me to know he'd tried to warn me the only way he could, without breaking a promise to Bennett's dad. Apparently, this wasn't Bennett's first double life. Brady explained that years ago, before I met Bennett, he'd done something similar with women in Los Angeles and San Francisco. It never went as far as marriage, but he'd had serious relationships in both cities, traveling back and forth. When Bennett's dad discovered what was happening, he'd forced Bennett into therapy and made the family swear to never discuss it. They thought he'd gotten help, that it was some kind of psychological issue he'd overcome. Brady apologized for not being more direct at the party. He said he'd been struggling with whether to tell me explicitly, But family loyalty and the alcohol had made him take the coward's way out with vague hints. I thanked him for calling, but told him his hints had been completely useless. He admitted he deserved that, and asked if there was anything he could do to help now. I told him the best thing he could do was make sure the entire family knew exactly what Bennett had done this time. After hanging up, I told Amanda about the call. She was as shocked as I was that this was apparently a pattern for Bennett. We stayed up late, going through social media to see if there were any other women we could warn, but found nothing obvious. Around midnight, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Bennett's dad, Ralph. His message was brief but clear. Bennett was at their house in a state, and Ralph wanted to speak with me. I showed Amanda, and she immediately said I shouldn't go alone if at all. I agreed and texted back that I had nothing to say to him or Bennett, but if he wanted to talk, he could meet me in public tomorrow. Ralph responded almost immediately, saying he understood my caution but wanted to make things right however he could. He suggested meeting for coffee the next morning and promised Bennett wouldn't be there. I agreed, partly out of curiosity about what making things right could possibly mean in this situation. Ralph was already at the coffee shop when I arrived. He got straight to the point. He apologized for his son's actions and said the whole family was devastated. Then he slid a check across the table. I looked down at it. It was for $50,000. I stared at him in disbelief. Ralph explained that he knew money couldn't fix what Bennett had done, but he wanted to cover any wedding deposits I'd lost, plus additional compensation for the emotional distress. His exact words, like this was a business transaction or lawsuit settlement. I realized he was trying to buy my silence, to make me go away quietly. I pushed the check back and told him I didn't want his money. I wanted him to understand that his son was a predator who had deliberately deceived 2 women for years, and that his previous attempts to sweep Bennett's behavior under the rug had enabled this to happen again, this time with the child involved. Ralph looked stunned. He clearly hadn't expected me to refuse the money. As I was leaving, Ralph called after me, asking what I planned to do next. I told him truthfully that I hadn't decided, but that buying my silence wasn't an option. His face hardened and he said, "Bennett has made mistakes, but he's still my son. I'll protect him however I need to." When I got back to Amanda's car, I was shaking. She wanted to go back and confront Ralph, but I just wanted to get away. As we drove off, I told her about the conversation and the check. She called Ralph every name in the book, then suggested we meet up with Rayon before he flew back to Mexico, to update him on this development. Rayon was checking out of his hotel when we arrived. He wasn't surprised about Ralph's attempt to buy me off. Apparently, he'd made a similar offer to Gabriella via email overnight, which she'd immediately forwarded to Rayon. The amount offered to her was significantly larger, $200,000, ostensibly for the child's future. Rayon had advised her to ignore it for now. Rayon showed me some messages from Gabriella. She'd made it back to Mexico City safely and had met with her own family. They were all rallying around her, furious at Bennett's deception. Her doctor had checked her over and said that despite the stress, both she and the baby were doing okay. She was planning to file for divorce as soon as possible. That afternoon, I finally worked up the courage to go back to the condo to get more of my things. Amanda came with me for support, and we timed it for when I knew Bennett would be at his parents' house, based on texts from Nicole. The condo was a mess. Bennett had clearly been there and had some kind of meltdown. There were broken dishes in the kitchen, clothes thrown around the bedroom, and empty liquor bottles on the coffee table. I quickly gathered more of my belongings, focusing on sentimental items and financial documents that couldn't be replaced. As I was packing up my jewelry box, I found something that made my blood run cold. Hidden beneath my necklaces was a small velvet pouch containing a ring I'd never seen before. It wasn't my style at all, ostentatious and gaudy. Inside the pouch was a slip of paper with the jeweler's logo and a date. 3 months from now. Another engagement ring. I showed Amanda, who grabbed the ring and said we should take it to get appraised, use the money for my fresh start. I hesitated, not wanting to sink to Bennett's level, but Amanda argued that he owed me at least this much. I finally agreed to hold on to it until I spoke with the lawyer Rayon had recommended. As we were leaving, Bennett's car pulled into the parking lot. Amanda and I froze, then rushed to finish loading my car. Bennett saw us and ran over, blocking my driver's side door. He started pleading with me to listen, saying he could explain everything, that he knew he'd messed up but he still loved me. When I tried to get around him to my car, he grabbed my arm. Amanda immediately stepped between us, telling him to back the hell off before she called the police. Bennett turned on Amanda then, telling her this was between him and me, that she needed to stay out of our relationship problems. I'd never seen this side of him before. Desperate, aggressive, almost unhinged. I told him firmly that we didn't have a relationship anymore, and if he didn't let me leave immediately, I would call the police. That's when he noticed the box with the framed photos of us that I was taking. He lunged for it, saying I couldn't take those, they were his too. In the struggle, the box fell and glass shattered everywhere. I used that moment to get in my car with Amanda jumping in the passenger side. As I started the engine, Bennett slapped his hand on the window, leaving a sweaty handprint as he yelled that he'd lose everything if I didn't help him fix this. His job was on the line, his family was falling apart, and Gabriella's family was talking about pressing charges in Mexico. I rolled down the window just enough to tell him that he should have thought of that before living a double life for 4 years. Then I backed out, forcing him to step away from the car, and drove off with him still shouting in the parking lot. That night, I checked in with Gabriella via text. She sent me a photo of herself surrounded by her family, looking exhausted but supported. She told me Bennett had been calling her parents' house nonstop until they blocked his number. Now he was emailing her every hour, alternating between apologies, excuses, and pleas about wanting to be part of his daughter's life. Gabriella told me her lawyer was already working on the divorce filing and had advised her to document all contact from Bennett. She also mentioned that Rayon had spoken with the lawyer he'd recommended to me, and they wanted to coordinate our responses to make sure Bennett couldn't manipulate either of us. As I was messaging with Gabriella, Bennett somehow found out I was staying with Amanda. He showed up at her apartment building around midnight, buzzing every apartment until someone let him in. He pounded on Amanda's door, waking up not just us but several neighbors. Amanda called the building security, who removed him from the property with a warning that they'd call the police next time. But Bennett wasn't done. He sat in his car in the visitor parking lot all night, sending me messages about how he just wanted to talk, how he wouldn't leave until I heard him out, how he could explain everything if I just gave him 5 minutes. Around 3 a.m., the messages took a darker turn. He started blaming me for overreacting, saying I'd ruined his life over what was essentially just poor communication. He claimed I had no right to contact Gabriella, that I'd put his unborn child at risk by causing her mother so much stress. I showed the messages to Amanda, who insisted on calling the police. They came and made Bennett leave, but without a restraining order, there wasn't much else they could do. By morning, Bennett had escalated his campaign. He'd gotten hold of my parents' new phone number and called them, spinning some story about how I'd had a mental breakdown and was making wild accusations. Thankfully, my parents knew me better than that. My dad had told Bennett in no uncertain terms never to contact them again. I finally fell asleep around 6 a.m., completely drained. Amanda woke me at 11 o'clock, looking concerned. My phone had been buzzing constantly, and it wasn't just Bennett. His father, Ralph, had been calling too, and so had several unknown numbers. I checked my voicemails to find Ralph had left 5 messages, each more threatening than the last. He'd started with offers of money again, then moved to thinly veiled warnings about making things difficult for everyone involved. The final message was clear. Back off, stop talking to Gabriella, and sign an NDA he'd had drawn up, or he'd make sure I regretted it. The unknown numbers were from friends of Bennett's, people I'd met once or twice at parties. They all had the same message. I needed to talk to Bennett. I was breaking him. He wasn't eating or sleeping. He might do something desperate. It was a coordinated guilt trip and it made me furious. I forwarded all the voicemails to the lawyer Rayon had connected me with, then got ready to meet Reagan, his sister, for lunch. Reagan was already at the restaurant when I arrived. When she saw me, she stood up awkwardly, clearly unsure whether to hug me or shake my hand or what. I made the decision for her with a quick hug and we sat down. The conversation started awkwardly. Reagan kept apologizing for Bennett, then catching herself, saying she knew apologies couldn't fix this. She told me their family was in chaos. Their father was in full damage control mode. Their mother was devastated and furious, and Bennett was having what Reagan described as some kind of breakdown. Then Reagan told me something that made everything click into place. Growing up, Bennett had always created elaborate lies and alternate versions of himself. He told different friend groups completely different stories about his life, his interests, even his summer vacations. When caught, he'd always have perfectly reasonable explanations that somehow made everyone feel bad for doubting him. Their parents had taken him to therapists as a teenager, but Bennett was charming and intelligent. He could convince the therapist that his parents were overreacting to normal teenage behavior. By college, they'd given up trying to address it, hoping he'd grow out of it. Reagan started crying as she admitted she'd seen signs of Bennett's deception with me, but had convinced herself it wasn't her place to interfere. I reached across the table and took her hand. I told her this wasn't her fault, and that Bennett was clearly very skilled at manipulation. She squeezed my hand and said she'd always wanted me as a sister-in-law, and she was heartbroken about everything, including the niece she'd just learned about. As we were talking, I noticed a man watching us from the bar. It took me a moment to recognize him. It was Clyde, one of Bennett's closest friends from college. When he saw me notice him, he quickly looked away and pretended to be very interested in his phone. I realized with a sinking feeling that Bennett was still having me monitored, using his friends to track my movements and report back. I pointed him out to Reagan, who looked mortified. She immediately stood up, walked over to Clyde, and confronted him loudly enough that several nearby tables turned to watch. Clyde stammered something about just happening to be there, but Reagan wasn't having it. She told him he was pathetic for helping Bennett stalk me, and that he needed to leave immediately or she'd make a scene he wouldn't forget. Clyde slunk out, and Reagan returned to the table, apologizing for her brother's behavior. It reinforced that she was being genuine with me. As lunch ended, Reagan asked if I would consider meeting with their parents, both of them, to discuss everything. I was immediately suspicious given Ralph's threatening voicemails. Reagan assured me it wasn't a trap. Her mother had insisted on it and was forcing Ralph to cooperate. She thought they needed to hear directly from me what Bennett had done, with no filters or minimizing. I told her I'd think about it and discuss it with my lawyer first. As we were leaving the restaurant, my phone rang with an international number. It was Gabriella and she was panicking. Bennett had somehow convinced his way past the security at her parents' building in Mexico City and was outside their apartment, refusing to leave until she spoke with him. Her family had called the police, but Bennett was making a scene, yelling about his rights as the baby's father. Gabriella was terrified and asked if I knew anyone who could help control Bennett from the U.S. side. I immediately called Nicole, who answered on the first ring. When I told her what was happening, she went deadly quiet, then said she'd handle it. 10 minutes later, Gabriella texted that Bennett had received a call and left abruptly. Nicole had apparently threatened to completely cut him off financially and legally if he didn't leave Gabriella alone immediately. That evening, I met with the lawyer Rayon had recommended. He reviewed all the messages, threats, and harassment from Bennett and his father. He advised filing for a restraining order immediately and documented everything for potential future legal action. He also warned me that cross-border legal issues could get complicated, but he'd coordinate with Rayon to ensure both Gabriella and I were protected. The week after the confrontation became a nightmare of constant harassment. Bennett wouldn't stop calling from different numbers. I'd block one and he'd call from another. In just 3 days, I blocked 17 different numbers. Each voicemail was more desperate than the last. Crying, pleading, then getting angry and blaming me for overreacting. As if discovering your fiancé has a whole secret family is something you can overreact to. Bennett figured out where I was staying and showed up at Amanda's at 2 a.m., pounding on her door and yelling that he needed to talk to me. The neighbors called security, who threatened to call the police if he didn't leave. Bennett eventually left, but not before sliding a 10-page handwritten letter under the door explaining his side of things. I read the letter. Biggest mistake ever. It was pure manipulation. Bennett claimed he'd gotten trapped in the situation with Gabriella because of cultural expectations after a one-night stand. That he tried to end it multiple times, but she was unstable. That he was planning to tell me everything after our wedding. Every paragraph was more delusional than the last. He somehow painted himself as the victim in all this. I tore it up and threw it away. The next day Nicole called me. Bennett had been officially fired from his job. The company cited falsified travel expenses and conduct unbecoming after an internal investigation. Apparently, he'd been charging the company for his trips to see Gabriella, while claiming they were business-related. She told me Bennett was staying with Ralph, refusing to eat or shower, just drinking and sending messages to both Gabriella and me. I got a restraining order after he showed up at my workplace, causing a scene that ended with security escorting him out. The judge granted it immediately after seeing the evidence. 73 messages from different numbers, the recording of Ralph threatening me, and statements from witnesses who'd seen Bennett's increasingly erratic behavior. Rayon called with updates from Mexico. Gabriella had filed bigamy charges against Bennett, and the Mexican authorities were taking it seriously. Bennett was now effectively banned from entering Mexico. If he tried, he'd be arrested at the border. This meant he would likely never meet his daughter, at least not on his terms. The restraining order seemed to finally make Bennett realize he couldn't harass me into forgiving him. Instead, he shifted his entire focus to salvaging his relationship with Gabriella. He sent her family expensive gifts, which they returned unopened. He tried contacting her doctor's office, claiming he needed updates about his child. They shut that down immediately after Gabriella warned them. About 6 weeks after the confrontation, Gabriella went into early labor. Nicole flew to Mexico City to be with her, with Gabriella's blessing. Bennett tried to go too, but was stopped at the airport when his passport was flagged. He ended up having a complete meltdown in the terminal, which someone recorded and posted online. The video showed him screaming about his rights as a father while security held him back from boarding a flight he wasn't allowed on. 2 days later, Gabriella's daughter was born healthy despite arriving a few weeks early. She sent me a photo with a simple message: "Thank you for saving us." I cried when I saw that tiny perfect face, thinking about how differently things could have gone if I hadn't found that iPad. Bennett's reaction to becoming a father, he couldn't see, was to get blackout drunk and crash his car into a tree. He wasn't seriously hurt, but he got a DUI. As for me, I'm slowly rebuilding my life. I moved into my own apartment last month. I changed my last name back to my maiden name and got a new job. The strangest part is that I'm actually grateful it happened this way. If I hadn't found that iPad, I might have married him. I might have had children with him. I might have spent decades with a man living a double life before discovering the truth. Instead, I got out before those deeper entanglements made separation impossible. As for Bennett, his latest message came from yet another burner number last week, the 73rd I've blocked so far. All it said was, "Living in my car again. Hope you're both happy now. We are. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever faced something this absolutely wild? Tell me what you think. I really want to know."